When people say their budget is broken, they usually don't mean the math is wrong. Most of the time, the numbers technically add up. What they really mean is that everything feels fragile. One unexpected expense, one bad grocery run, one busy week of eating out, and suddenly the whole month feels off. That's where food quietly becomes one of the biggest pressure points. Not because food is optional, but because it's one of the few areas people interact with every single day. And small decisions there tend to add up faster than anyone expects. What's interesting is that fixing a budget often has less to do with earning more, and more to do with reducing friction. Fewer emergencies, fewer last-minute purchases, fewer moments where you feel forced to spend instead of choosing to. And certain foods seem to show up again and again in households where money feels more stable. Not exciting foods, not trendy ones, just foods that quietly make everything else easier. So instead of telling anyone what they should buy or eat, this video is really about noticing patterns. 7 foods that tend to lower pressure, stretch time, and make a budget feel less fragile, and why they seem to matter so much. Before we get into it, take a second to like this video if you want to support the channel, and subscribe if you enjoy content that looks at money in a practical, realistic way. Alright, let's get into it. One of the most important foods to notice is rice. Rice shows up everywhere budgets are tight, and that's not an accident. It's cheap, it lasts a long time, and it turns small amounts of other food into something that feels complete. What's interesting about rice isn't just the cost per serving, but the way it reduces decision-making. When rice is around, meals don't require as much creativity or urgency. There's always a base. And that base quietly reduces the temptation to order food or grab something expensive just because nothing feels ready. Rice doesn't fix a budget by itself, but it removes a lot of the daily pressure that causes budgets to break in the first place. Another food that plays a similar role is pasta. Pasta isn't impressive, and it doesn't try to be, but it has a way of turning almost nothing into a full meal. A bit of sauce, oil, frozen vegetables, or leftovers, and suddenly dinner exists. What stands out about pasta is how forgiving it is. It doesn't punish you for being tired, busy, or unprepared. And when people are overwhelmed, they tend to spend more money without realizing it. Pasta quietly acts as a buffer against that. It gives people an option that feels complete without feeling expensive, and that alone can stabilize a budget more than most people expect. Potatoes are another food that tends to fix budgets without getting much credit. They're heavy, filling, and usually inexpensive, especially compared to how much space they take up on a plate. Potatoes reduce the need for large portions of more expensive foods. They make meals feel substantial. Historically, potatoes show up whenever people had to survive on very little, and that pattern hasn't really changed. They don't spoil quickly if stored properly, they can be cooked in dozens of ways, and they don't require extra ingredients to feel satisfying. That combination of fullness, flexibility, and low cost quietly removes a lot of financial stress around meals. Oats are another food that often shows up in more stable budgets. Not because they're exciting, but because they create routine. Oats are predictable. They store well, they're filling, and they replace more expensive convenience foods without much effort. What's interesting is how oats reduce the number of decisions someone has to make in a day. When at least one meal feels handled, spending tends to calm down elsewhere. Less grabbing snacks, less impulse buying, less feeling behind. Oats don't just save money directly, they reduce the mental noise that often leads to overspending. Eggs are another food that quietly fixes budgets. Eggs are interesting because they sit in a sweet spot between cost, nutrition, and versatility. They can be breakfast, lunch, or dinner. They can stand alone or stretch other foods, and they cook quickly, which matters more than people realize. When food takes too long or feels complicated, spending tends to increase. Eggs remove that friction, they make it easier to eat at home without feeling like it's a project. And that ease often translates into fewer unplanned expenses throughout the week. Beans are another food that shows up consistently in households that manage money carefully. Beans do more than one job at once. They're filling, they're cheap, and they make meals feel complete even when there isn't much else available. Dried beans in particular turn time into savings. They store well, expand when cooked, and reduce the need for more expensive proteins without feeling like a sacrifice. What's noticeable is that beans don't feel like a downgrade. They just feel normal. And that normalization matters when trying to keep spending under control long term. The last food worth paying attention to is flour. Flour isn't a meal, it's potential. bread, flatbreads, pancakes, simple doughs. Flour allows people to turn effort into volume. It stretches other ingredients and creates food where there otherwise might not be any. What's interesting is how flour shows up in households where people want more control over their spending. Not perfection, not gourmet cooking, just the ability to make something when needed. That ability changes how food spending feels. It turns emergencies into inconveniences, and that shift alone can stabilize a budget. When you step back and look at these foods together, a pattern becomes clear. Rice and pasta create a base. Potatoes and oats add fullness and routine. Eggs and beans provide flexibility. Flour adds control. None of these foods are exciting on their own. They don't feel like financial hacks. But together, they reduce friction. They reduce urgency. And they reduce the number of moments where spending feels unavoidable. That's often what actually fixes a budget. Not discipline, not restriction, but fewer moments of pressure. I'm curious about this one. Which of these foods do you rely on the most, or is there one that's always in your kitchen no matter what? Drop it in the comments. It's interesting to see how different people build stability in different ways. And if you like this kind of calm, practical look at money and everyday choices, subscribe for more content like this. In the meantime, click on one of the videos showing at your screen right now.